You're listening to Off Color, a podcast where we keep it real when we talk about race and identity. I'm your host, Rebecca Henderson, aka the Tan Tigress, and I have the impeccable Janice of European descent, Motsko. Hey, Janice, so glad that you're here.
Hey, everybody. Happy to be here.
All right. All right, Off Color fam, I cannot believe it. Mark Charles, presidential candidate for 2020, has agreed to talk to me again. And I am so excited to be able to have this conversation with this fantastic person that should be a household name. And after this podcast, will be. Is it working?
Hello, it's Mark Charles.
Hi, Mark Charles. It's Rebecca Henderson.
Rebecca, how are you?
I am so well. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Are you hanging tough?
Yeah, it's been a good week. We did a live stream yesterday, had several interviews this week. So, yeah, we're feeling good about what's going on right now.
Okay, well, I'm very excited. I do have one person here, just my producer. Her name is Janice of European descent.
Okay.
Because I have to stop calling people white. We're working on that, basically. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Mark Charles. Welcome back to Off Color, Mark Charles.
Well, yeah, Rebecca, thank you very much. It's good to be back on the show with you. For anyone who's new to the podcast or didn't hear me the last time I was on, please let me introduce myself. So, yat Mark Charles, Yinashya. Sin Bakadana Nishla, the Tohiglini Bashashin, Sin Bakadana Dashache, the Toruchini Dashanella. In our Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our four clans, and we're matrilineals of people with our identities coming from our mother's mother. And my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, which is why I say Sin Bakadana, which loosely translated means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake. Then my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totochitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I'm also talking to you from the land of the Piscataway. So the Piscataway are the nation that were the original inhabitants here in what's now known as Washington, D.C., and I want to honor them as the host people of these lands and thank them for the stewardship they've had of these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years. And you, of course, are located in Denver, which is the land of the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. And I want to also acknowledge the people, the Cheyenne and Arapaho in Denver. And I'm actually going to be in Oklahoma next week, and I'm looking forward to trying to stop by their Native Nation location in Oklahoma and speak with some of the leaders there. But it's important to honor that their traditional lands are back in Colorado.
We talked about this last time about how, like, in Canada, the land acknowledgement is, like, standard basically now. And so I was wondering, like, what is a good, how do you come up with your, like, land acknowledgement? Is there a template for it? Is there, like, what should we do? And how can it be really sincere, I guess, and not, like, performative?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the things that, first of all, is to do the research of whose land are you on? And one of the best starting places for that research is this website called native-land.ca. And it's a group out of Canada that is putting a lot of time and effort into researching the traditional location of lands for different nations in North America and the treaties. So you can type in your zip code, type in your city, and it will give you a list of the people who are traditional to the land where that zip code or that city is located. It's not the ultimate authority, but it's a great place to begin your research of who are the people from these lands. And then I often encourage people to begin to build a relationship with people in those lands. So it's more than just we're acknowledging their name, but in name only, but ultimately seeking to have not only a good relationship with them, but even their blessing or even their permission to be on those lands. And that comes through the building of relationship, the building of trust, and the honoring of them as the host people of the land, which includes knowing the story and how they were removed from those lands. And, of course, the Cheyenne and Arapaho, the story from there is the massacre at Sand Creek.
We want to update on what's happening, all things Mark Charles 2020, like lay it on us.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that is the reality, which I'm not celebrating this, but it's why I'm running as an independent and not as a Democrat or a Republican, is that the pool of Democratic candidates is getting much, much smaller and much, much wider. So again, this pool of candidates that began a year ago, and in the first debate, they had over 20 candidates. They had more women, more people of color, more members of LGBTQ running for president within the Democratic Party than we've ever had in our nation's history. Eventually, when they got down to the debate just before the Iowa caucus in Des Moines, there were no people of color left on the stage. That diverse group of people has gotten much smaller and much wider. And the reason for that is because they were forced by their party essentially to campaign in the states of Iowa and New Hampshire. So Iowa is the sixth widest state in the country. New Hampshire is the fourth. Iowa has the highest rate of private lands of any state in the nation. New Hampshire has one of the highest rates of home ownership. Iowa has a state law requiring them to be the first caucus or primary state in the country. And New Hampshire has a state law requiring them to be the first primary state in the country for presidential elections. And because the parties buy into this, it literally forces candidates to spend the first year of their campaign campaigning to white landowners.
Because that is how nature intended it, right?
They have been set up as the gatekeeper by our nation for presidential elections. And, of course, it makes perfect sense why that diverse group of people got much wider and wider as time passed. Again, this is why I'm not running as a Democrat. A lot of people over the past year have critiqued me and said, I'm not going to vote for you because you're running as an independent and you're not part of the two-party system and you're just trying to get attention or be a protest vote. What people don't understand is that because of the way the system's set up, had I run as a Democrat, they're right, I could have raised more money, I could have been in the debates, I could have brought a lot more attention to my issues, but like every other candidate of color, I would now be exiting the stage. Yeah. And so the proof that I'm not running a protest campaign is that I'm running as an independent and not as a Democrat. The independent process to the White House is the most difficult way to get there, but it's the only path that actually lets me get there. And so while I'm not celebrating the fact that the Democratic pool of candidates is becoming smaller and wider, this is the reality I was aware of before I even announced my campaign. This is why I'm running as an independent. And as that group gets smaller and more white, the more visible my campaign is becoming. And so in the past few weeks and months, we have seen a steady increase in our social media awareness and interactions we're getting as candidates are dropping out. Some of their volunteers are reaching out to us and saying, hey, whenever my candidate drops out of the race, you're my second choice and I'm going to get behind you. And so as all of these candidates are falling by the wayside, we are actually gaining more momentum, we're gaining more exposure, and our campaign is becoming more and more visible.
I'm going to go ahead and pat myself on the back for catching you early on. Because I'm like, no, I interviewed him in October, guys. I agree with you. I think people are looking for that. I know that I have been having my own personal struggles with the presidential election because, you know, my focus is very local. I'm into municipal elections. I'm into like state legislature more so than like the national stage, just because in my experience, I've had more impact there. I see the impact sort of on the day-to-day life of people. However, now as it's come down to sort of progressives, I'm wondering if you're definitely not dropping out. Is that what's happening? Let's just put it that way. Are you staying in the race till the bitter end? I am not dropping out.
I am in the race, and the way that I get access to the ballot is by getting signatures in all 50 states. And this is a very logistical laden process because every state has different requirements and different starting points and ending points and what you need when you collect your signatures and what you have to have before you collect your signatures, so on and so forth. And so we are in the process now of beginning collecting signatures, and we've identified 18 states where we want to begin collecting signatures immediately. And of those 18 states, we've identified 3 where we want to make them our priority. One is the state of Utah, and the other is the state of Oregon. We've chosen those states because we can actually get on the ballot there with 1,000 signatures, and we're beginning the process there. But the top priority that we're working on right now is the state of Oklahoma. And the state of Oklahoma requires, I think it's 10,000 signatures, but you can actually get on the ballot in Oklahoma by paying a fee of $35,000 in lieu of those signatures. Again, the signatures have to come from any one particular state, but the money can come from anywhere. And so because my campaign is not well known enough in any one particular location where we have a large number of supporters in any single location or even within any single state, the ability to raise $35,000 nationally is actually, I think, a very doable process. And so we just kicked off. I sent out an email to our supporters and to our donors yesterday.
Yeah, I saw it on Facebook.
Post.
Yeah. Shared it already.
Yeah,
we got it. We've been sharing it.
I published a blog post on my blog for our campaign today, telling people this is what we're doing, and even telling people you don't even have to vote for me yet. You can be a Democrat or Republican. You could have voted for Bernie Sanders in Iowa. You could have voted for Elizabeth Warren in New Hampshire. You could be an avid Trump supporter, or you could be volunteering for Bill Weld. It doesn't matter. You can still donate to our campaign. If you think my presence as a Native man, if you think my unifying message for all the people, and if you think my bipartisan critique of our foundations is something that needs to be in this presidential election process, you can donate to our campaign, help me get on the ballot in Oklahoma, and begin the process of getting on the ballot in all these other states, ensuring that this message is going to be included throughout the entire campaign. And I still have 9 months to convince you to vote for me.
Okay.
I don't need your vote today. I'd like your money, but I don't need your vote today. I have 9 months still to convince you I have the best vision for this nation. But right now, I just have to convince you, if you think the things I'm bringing into the conversation are important enough for us to talk about, then donate to my campaign so that we can make sure this message stays in the campaign throughout the process.
So I love that, and that's why I am a supporter of yours. I think you already know that because I be tweeting, but I am a supporter because of that, because I think this conversation is so important. And even still, I had something happened in my personal life, right, around this presidential. I had like a fight, an internet fight over Warren versus Sanders. And one of the things that you said to me that has stuck with me very strongly was this idea of American exceptionalism. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Bernie or Warren, if they're progressives, if it's still rooted in this, the basis of our entire nation. I guess I was wondering about, and I think, I'm just guessing people are asking this, but it has particular importance to me at this time because I literally just had a conversation with a person who identifies as Native, who grew up off the reservation, but his family is Native, and he considers me a racist because I am supporting Elizabeth Warren for the primary. And everybody knows that I'm like, Mark Charles, right? But I decided that I was supporting Elizabeth Warren because of Julian Castro, right? And that's the decision I made. And I'm not looking for someone to say, no, Rebecca, you're not a racist. You don't, that's not what I'm thinking about. I guess I'm just also wondering what your perspective is on Elizabeth Warren and her lies about her indigeneity. I don't even think I even know how to say that word. If you had to support one of them? Like, if you had to vote, or would you not vote? Are you not going to vote at all? Are you going to vote for yourself? Like, what's going to happen?
Yeah, so in the last election in 2016, I voted for myself. In D.C., you can write in any name you want, and I did not like any of the people who were running, and I voted for myself here in D.C. I have a bipartisan critique. So there's definitely things I like that some of the candidates are saying. One of the candidates I was most intrigued by in of the Democratic parties, I was impressed by Julian Castro when I was with him at the Frank Lemire Native American Presidential Forum in Iowa last August. And I have appreciated Cory Booker. Now, anyone who listens to me regularly or listens to my speeches or follows me online knows that I actually probably critique Cory the most of any of the candidates, especially when he was endorsing Hillary Clinton and the DNC in 2016. And he acknowledged that there is the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as savages. The Constitution never mentions women, and the also has the Three-Fifths Compromise. He acknowledged all three of those at the Democratic National Convention, which was courageous. No one ever acknowledges those things at that level. But then he followed that up by telling the Democratic Party that these things do not detract from our nation's greatness. Now, as I've observed and watched Cory, I think he's a man who has a lot of integrity. He's living among his constituents, and he's putting himself out with his people. He seems to have a lot of integrity, and he seems to understand the critique of our nation. And he is not afraid to say it, but he follows it up frequently with this notion of, but we're still exceptional, especially when you have to campaign in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. I think he would prefer just to leave the critique where it is and not follow it up with this exceptional backstepping in order to appease white people. But because he was a Democrat, because that's the way you have to play it when you're into the two-party system, he would add those kind of at the end. And so Cory Booker really intrigued me. Elizabeth Warren, and she was also at the Frank Lemire Forum, and first thing that she did when she got on stage is she apologized to the people who were there, to our Native peoples, for the way she had misrepresented herself. Native people, at least the people at the forum, seemed to respond positively to what she said. Now, the challenge I have with not just Elizabeth Warren, but really with all of the Democratic candidates, especially those who showed up at the forum, is they come and they all say the right thing. They all talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and we have to address this. And they talk about the Remove the Stain Act. We have to address this. But one of the things that was so upsetting for me was right after the forum, the very next debate, which was in Houston, and they had an entire discussion on white supremacy, on racism, on police shootings, and not a single candidate brought up Native America and Indian country. Not a single candidate has done a land acknowledgement during a presidential debate. And at the last forum, Elizabeth Warren, and I think it was Pete Buttigieg, said that they would put Indian country's budget and take it out of the discretionary spending column and put it into the mandated spending column. To make that happen in our current political environment, that will be a very public battle. You're not going to do that behind the scenes. You're not going to do that behind closed doors. That is going to be an all-out political battle to get the United States Congress to agree to move its funding for Indian country from discretionary to mandated. And so far, none of the candidates, including Elizabeth Warren, including Pete Buttigieg, including Bernie Sanders, when they are standing on the biggest stage they have right now, which is the presidential debate, and not a single time has any of them had the courage to do a land acknowledgement, or has any of them been able to bring in Indian country into the center of those dialogues, even when they're talking about white supremacy, racism, police shootings, and things like that. And so if they can't do it while they're running, what makes anyone think that they're going to be able to do it while they're president? At the last forum, Tom Steyer and I were the only ones who showed up in person. Everyone else either did a video or sent a letter or did a live stream. Tom and I were the only ones who showed up in person. In the last debate in New Hampshire, Tom Steyer, he must have been listening to me because he actually said that he would call for a national commission on race if he were president. Which, again, I've been calling for a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. I mean, this is one of my key planks of my platform. And Tom Steyer said he would call for a national commission on race. He didn't call it truth and reconciliation, but he said, I want a national commission on race to deal with. And then he went through the things he wanted to deal with. And every single one of the things he mentioned was about African Americans. He did not once mention Native issues.
So I have a question for you around that, like where I wanna get into it. Are you ready? Here I go.
Mm-hmm.
So because basing this on the interaction that I had with my Native friend, and I felt like he was like, hey, you only care about racism if it's about Black people. And sometimes it's hard for us to hear that because, like, obviously it's like that's not true for me, but it doesn't matter because that's like the impact of like my words, right? To me, what I hear from that as a Black person is I hear a lot of anti-Blackness in that, where it's like, oh, we don't want to center Blackness, we only want to center Indigenous voices. But I think that that's like a problem in the United States around our dialogues on it, because the conversation I literally just had, with my friend De La Vaca, he's just like, hey, you are upholding white supremacy by voting for Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders is better because he did XYZ. It feels like that is why we also need to be having these conversations, because I feel like I don't want to get into like oppression Olympics, right? Like I feel like even that term, like I feel really uncomfortable even saying that. I guess I'm wondering, what would a real conversation around race, like a national conversation with truth and conciliation, like what does that really look like?
Well, again, the challenge we're faced with here is for a majority of Americans, they define race and racism as white versus Black. Like, that's the way racism is defined by and large in our nation. And a lot of that is because of the way the two races were constructed. So again, race is not a genetic difference. Race is a human construct. The Black race was constructed in part through what's called the one-drop rule, which states if you have a single drop of African blood, you're Black. Now, we had this rule because Blacks were enslaved. They were the labor force. They were the ones building this nation. And the country wanted as many Black people as possible, so they had the one-drop rule. The one-drop rule allowed a white slave owner to rape his female slaves and produce more baby slaves. The American Indian race was constructed in part through what's known as the blood quantum rule. Blood quantum rule states that you're full, you're half, you're a quarter, you're an eighth, you're a 16th, you're a 32nd, then you're bred out of existence. We had this rule because the mythology of the nation is that these lands were discovered. There was no one here. The nation has treaty obligations to Native peoples, so they want as few of us as possible. So our race was constructed to breed us out of existence. And so this is what has led to some of the perception of racism is primarily Black versus white, because Black population exploded or grew, whereas the Native population was diminished. I mean, the genocide rate for Native peoples is like 96%. If you look at the numbers of Natives pre-Columbus and get down to the smallest number, which was just after Abraham Lincoln's presidency in 1870, where it was down to 237,000. And so it's allowed this nation to define race one way instead of the other. And the other challenge with that is while what was stolen from African people was their labor. which this is why we're having the much-needed conversation in this election on reparations. What was stolen from Native peoples was our land. And while there might be some way to quantify labor, the nation has no desire to think about how do we make this thing just regarding land. This is why as recently as 2005, the Supreme Court affirms the doctrine of discovery as one of the legal precedents for land titles in an opinion written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because no one wants to open up that Pandora's box of what happens if we have to let our land titles be called into question. That's just not a number you can quantify. That breaks down the entire system. And so the country has very, very little interest. It's not that it's eager to deal with its unjust history against African Americans. But when we get down to what happened with Natives, it literally requires a breakdown and a reconstruction of the entire system.
Oh my gosh. So when you say that though, I already feel that jump in my stomach, right? And I do this work for the people, man, so people can hear a conversation, a real conversation. So when I hear you say, okay, we took labor and that's quantifiable, all I can think is it wasn't labor, it wasn't just labor, it was it was everything, every single thing got taken from us, and it, you know what I mean, as a people.
And I completely agree with that. You were out. It was the same doctrine of discovery that dehumanized your people, that dehumanized our people. But the way the nation has tried to quantify those things
is different.
It's the nation quantifying, you, not you quantifying.
Yeah, this is why we're having a conversation on reparations, because that's one way the nation has. I don't even want to say comfortable yet, but it's attempting to quantify that injustice. Now, yes, there was so much robbed that's not an injustice that can be repaid, and reparations, while necessary, is not going to fix the problem. I completely agree with you. I'm not trying to turn this into an oppression Olympics, but what I am trying to say is because dealing with Natives almost immediately forces the conversation around land. And the nation has no interest in rethinking land titles.
Where's my 40 acres and a mule? Okay, listen, I'm half black, so I'm going to take 20 acres and a pony.
So that's the problem. That's the problem is, again, the nation promised African people something that wasn't theirs to give.
Wow.
Those 40 acres were not white people's acres to give. And so what that does then is that now aligns the African-American community on the side of white people looking towards the oppression of Native peoples, because now, as a black person, you feel a sense of justice and entitlement towards land.
Yep.
Stop, man. You're making me think. Nobody likes thinking in America, sir.
And this is where I'm saying.
Yeah.
Very few people, including members of the African American community, are not interested in opening up the discussion on land.
So, okay, so then the other thing, though, where I get into it and why I was very uncomfortable in my interaction is because in my mind, I'm they're all trash. The only candidate that anyone should be voting for is Mark Charles, right?
Right.
No, I'm serious. I'm okay, if we're really going for it, if we're really trying to walk the walk and talk the talk and say that this is what we're trying to do and we want to change and we want revolution and we want equity and on our way to equality or whatever that looks like, then we can't vote for any of these motherfuckers.
Well, and that's the challenge, is right now there's no one left on the stage, I would say, who understands race.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Bernie doesn't get race.
Okay, thank you.
Elizabeth Warren doesn't get race.
I just feel like Bernie doesn't have what I would consider a racial lens. I guess the kind of lens that I am wanting him to have.
Bernie, one of Bernie's strong points, I think, with Native communities is he did something that very few other candidates have done. This year, we've had a forum. There's been more notice of Native communities. In 2016, there was very little attention to Native communities. And Bernie Sanders went out of his way and began campaigning to Native peoples. And when you're a part of a demographic that is largely ignored politically, that sense of being seen is very powerful. So I really liked Bernie Sanders in 2016 because I liked the fact that he went out of his way to see us and to talk with us.
So
However,
Uh-oh.
Bernie does not get race. He doesn't understand the depth of the problem, and he has not demonstrated that he is willing to bring these issues to the most visible and highest platforms that he sits on. And again, right now, those platforms are the Democratic primary debates. And he is not willing to talk about Native issues in depth.
What is the
None of the candidates are willing to do that.
What's the Native community's reputation, or what is their history with voting? Are they voting and being part of this? Yeah, do they vote? Yeah, do Native peoples vote? Or
yeah. When I lived on the reservation, I can't speak for all Native Americans, but as a group that's been as marginalized as we have been marginalized and disenfranchised as much as we've been disenfranchised, there is a strong percentage of our people who vote. And when I lived on the reservation, I actually loved Election Day because not only was it a day to go and vote, but the different campaigns would have their people there. And they would literally serve mutton stew and fry bread and hamburgers. And so you would go to vote, and then you would come out, and all the campaigns would have their food stands there where they were giving out food. And you could just sit there and talk with your neighbors. And I loved voting on the reservation.
Interesting. I think we need more of that in general.
More fry bread.
Yeah, more fry bread. Make it a holiday. Make it a celebration, and that's what it should be.
Yeah, I don't know I don't have the stat in front of me of what percentage of our people vote, but there's a strong contingent of our community, of Native community, that is very active in voting and in being engaged. The problem is we have very little attention from our politicians.
Yeah, which surprises me because up until this point, I've kind of been of the mindset that the more that communities who are marginalized participate in the system, the more then candidates will talk about those issues that affect them because they need those votes. So,
well, see, this is the problem. When I lived on the reservation, I watched two presidential campaigns from the reservation, and it was appalling to me that you could become president and not even talk to Native peoples. And one of the reasons for that is, so the Navajo Nation, where I live, we have the largest reservation of any tribe in the country, 26,000 square miles. We have 300,000 enrolled tribal members, 180,000 which live on our reservation. If we were a state, land-wise, we would be the 40th largest state.
Wow.
But our reservation is in the Four Corners area with land in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah, and we don't have a single congressional district in any one of those states.
Whoa.
Which means we have no impact or marginalized impact on the Electoral College, which is why candidates don't have to campaign to us. And then on top of that, our issues are things that the country doesn't want to remember ever happened. We figured out that there's 7 states, I think, where Natives have a kind of a swing vote in that state where we can actually impact it within those 7 states. We've had 3 presidential forums. There was one in 2016, but only third-tier candidates attended that one. This is the first year Native American presidential forum that had top-tier candidates at it in the history of our nation.
Crazy.
So
So
speaking of the public debate, we do have to wrap it up. But I did want to say this year's Oscars, which, listen, I like low-key boycott the Oscars, but then I secretly watch them, okay? And I was thinking about the acknowledgement that happened there from the Maori director, I think it was.
Yes.
But that wasn't the first time that Sachin Littlefeather. Do you remember her or know about her?
No.
So it was in 1973, 1974, and Marlon Brando refused to accept his Oscar because of the treatment of like American Indians in the film industry. And I think it's very interesting that I had never heard of her, and I am like really surprised that you had never heard of her. Again, it's like that was like a pretty big moment of protest, and they're acting like no one ever protested at the Oscars before, like, or used it as a political platform. And when she was doing it in the 70s, it's making me question my own like racism or my own, because I don't really have any power ultimately, right? But like my own erasure or bias for indigenous peoples, because I think, or Native Americans specifically, because like to me this is like a perfect example of like she should be like a household name, you know what I mean? Like it was like a huge thing. I have some work to do and some thinking to do about my own stuff, and I'm hoping to kind of put that out into the world. Do you have any closing thoughts or things you would like to share with any of our listeners at this time? We'd love to have you on again. I hope that you will accept that. I love talking to you. I feel like you blow my mind, and I think you are what this country needs to hear. So How can we do that? How can we support you, Mark Charles?
I want to encourage people to, when they hear about my campaign or they learn about my campaign, to share it. Not just to share, like to retweet something or to post something up, but to actually retweet something and have a comment there. Or there's something more personal besides just blasting it out into kind of cyberspace, but to actually be much more targeted, and even to, in the physical world, to begin telling people about this campaign and about what we're trying to do. One of the most powerful tools we have out there for our campaign is the announcement video that I released last May. And I still regularly get emails and messages from people who watch that campaign, who watch that video. And I'm like, you're blowing my mind, and you're bringing such an important dialogue into this campaign. And we're also getting to the point where we need people to donate to our campaign.
Okay.
The first 9 months of the campaign, we raised $53,000. Our goal for the month of February is to raise $51,000. We want to pay this fee and get on the ballot in Oklahoma. There's several trips we have scheduled for this month. We also need the money. We don't need the millions of dollars or even the billions of dollars that these other candidates have, but we need money to begin hiring more staff. We need money to have a more robust travel schedule, and we need to have the resources to train our volunteers to get out and get the signatures we need to get on the ballot. While all these other candidates are stepping off the stage, I feel like our campaign is just beginning to get the momentum that it needs. If it comes out that we have two 70-year-old billionaires running for president from the Democrats and the Republicans, I mean, that's like a dream for me. I mean, what better way to draw the distinction between myself and the system than me campaigning against two 70-year-old billionaires?
Yeah.
I'm feeling very good about my campaign right now. I'm encouraging people not only to follow us on social media and check out our website, but subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are using our YouTube channel, Mark Charles 2020, on YouTube, and we are beginning to have a much more regular schedule of live streams of me sitting down, talking to people following our campaign, talking about my policies, talking about my strategies, talking about the issues we need to talk about. And it's letting me connect much more personally with the people who follow our campaign rather than speaking out to a large crowd of people. So YouTube is becoming one of our primary tools for getting the word out about our campaign right now.
Awesome.
Right, spread it out.
Yeah.
Well, we got to run. We got to exit the premises.
Yes.
Because
our time is up.
Punctuality and time is a tool of oppression, but sometimes we got to go. So Thank you so much, candidate.
And I just want to say, this land-owning person of European descent is really excited to eventually put a yard sign in front of our house for you and your campaign. So whenever you get those done, we will definitely be buying one. And whenever you come through Colorado,
email our campaign directly at I think it's info at markcharles2020.com. We can point them to a website where they can begin buying yard signs and things like that. We're not able to put that out publicly because of the information we have to collect when people buy yard signs or buy swag from us. Because when you purchase something from a campaign, it's the same as a donation.
I see.
But right now, if you email us at info@markcharles2020.com, we can connect you with those yard signs, those bumper stickers. You can get a coffee mug. You can get there's a bunch of stuff we have. So that'd be a great way to support our campaign.
All right. I'll get that out to your number one supporter. His name is Richard Good. He loves you. He will not give up on you. And it is totally based on the Off Color podcast. I know I definitely got you 2 votes for sure. 2.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. All right. Have a good one.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to Off Color. This is a community-supported show. So if you love this content, make sure you tell a friend, share, like, 5-star reviews only. We're never kidding about that. 5-star reviews only. We are made possible by you, our listeners. If you would like to support us in a more in-depth way, you can join our Patreon at Tan Tigress Productions. You get exclusive bonus content. We have really fun icebreaker questions that we're going to be putting up with our guests. We have little snippets, things that didn't make it in the pod because it was good, but it was just too long. There'll be some written content. There's behind the scenes from Sundance and from Running With My Girls film production. But make sure you follow us on all of our social media. We're on Facebook, Off Color Podcast. We're on the Twitters, Off Color Pod. If you're on our Patreon, you get discounts on Tan Tigress merch, Off Color merch, Running With My Girls merch. Anything that I'm selling on my store, you get a discount depending on which level you're contributing at. Yeah, you can give $1 or $1 million. Like, we'll take either one at this point, honestly. And cut.